So, hello. This is like one of the episodes I was looking forward for so long already. So I think I'm not sure if I really still need to introduce our guest today. I think like you're known as I don't know, every time I would meet you, you're surrounded by so many aspiring indie devs. Quite often also like at every game dev conference, I think you're like this fuel of wisdom for so many
Aw.
people. Again, super known in the industry. You have contributed to so many important projects, whether it's some of the more or less known games, which I can read from your Wikipedia page, like Ridiculous Fishing or Nuclear Throne, of course. But again, you're really a spokesperson, I think, for so many of us in the industry. And I think this is something which is very, very notable, very vivid. Many people would just wait if something happens. What's Rami gonna say about this? What's gonna be his
Right.
opinion?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you're pretty much a spokesperson for so many of us. Yeah, I'm more than excited to finally also talk to you about maybe some of the more like the things that actually like made you the person you're now. But I would like directly give the mic to you actually to tell
Well,
us the things you want us to tell about yourself. Because like I
well,
could like again I could also list things like the Forbes
right.
30 under 30 or
Yeah.
like the GDC award you got or the
No,
games
we're
games
good.
Quiz.
We're good.
So
We're good. You're gonna
but
gonna make
again
me blush on the camera here. Like that's cool.
oh
Uh
and the pilot thing maybe
oh
also.
yeah, yeah, that too. That too. Yeah, just a short intro. I'm Rami Ismail. I'm an independent game developer. I've been making games for God about 15 years professionally now. Like I started in 2010. 2009 really. Um, the Surprisingly, the things I ended up best known for, like you said, is not necessarily the games that I do. Like although Ridiculous Fishing and Nuclear Throne and Love Rousers all did really well, and my old studio Vlambeer that I used to run with my co-founder at the time, Jan Willem Nijman, was quite a notable indie studio. I think the thing I'm best known for is just sort of the very loud voice in the back of the room in the games industry that somewhat ideologically wants to believe that everything can be better, and then just goes like a programmer goes and goes, I can probably code something for that. Which is how PressKit happened. It's how a lot of things that I ended up doing happened. Um, but ultimately, I think that that's kind of what I'm best known for. It's just like I think it's really important as an industry that we make this place accessible, and I don't mean accessible in the like let's make lots of AI tools for everything, but like accessible in the like humans should create resources for humans, and humans should create opportunity for humans to make what they want, and to have the freedom to make what they want. And that's sort of what I became best known for. So didn't quite go how I expected when I was a kid, but it's not bad.
We need to directly talk about your expectations as a kid, but very briefly because you mentioned the press kit. This was immediately something which is always in my head when I think about your contributions. It sounds like a minor thing, but the press kit. Just to give context to the people who are not aware, we'll make sure to make all the links in the show notes. But this is like one of the super important and useful things for indie developers to actually like think about the game. Like it's this media kit which you provided like a sort of a template for
Right.
to help indie devs. I don't think not only to have like a good template what to put there, but also to make them think what they
Right.
should provide. So I
Yeah.
find this so smart.
It was a fun project. It started originally because I programmer, right? So Vlambeer was very notable for being a quite prolific game studio. We were doing 2, 3 games a year, sometimes small games, jam games, and then like a commercial game. But it meant that every time I had to do a new press kit, and at some point I just looked at it. I'm like, you know what, I can automate this. So um, I went and I talked to the press, and I went, okay, what is the information you need, and how do you want it? And they basically, with a lot of friends at the press, I worked with, I think with Brian Crescenti and a few others. I just kind of came up with like the ultimate structure for a PressKit, and it was like online, easy to access. Like it had good placement of images. It had all the information you need on both the game and the team. And I just built that into a thing that I could reuse. And then as part of it, I also wanted feedback from other developers to see if I could improve it further, right? And make my PressKit even better. But then every developer I showed it to went, "Oh my God, can we use this?" And I was like, I mean, it's definitely not, the code quality was atrocious. So I was like, rather not, but like if you really want to, like, yeah, of course, like I guess I can make. And so, but by the time like Phil Tobotowski and a bunch of who was at is that Young Horses, the creators of Octobat, and a bunch of others had all said like, "Can we use this?" I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I should just rewrite this. And then one of the things that really sort of like spoke to me was that a lot of press was frustrated that developers were getting this wrong. They were just like, a lot of people and a lot of journalists were just like, "Listen, we just need 3 screenshots. Like we're not asking for like 200 screens. We just need like 3 good ones, right? And we need like a 2-sentence summary of the game instead of like your life story attached to it. Like we don't need this podcast. What we need is the 2-sentence summary of the game." And so I when I realized that this was going to be a public thing, I hard coded it into PressKit. So your PressKit would not go live without 3 images. Your PressKit would not go live if you tried to use new lines in your short summary. You could use them in the long summary, but the short summary would stop you from using new lines. So I kind of nudged people towards making the PressKit that I knew the press wanted, and that was probably the most effective thing about it. To the point where even large studios were using it, and a lot of studios to this day, even studios that aren't using PressKit, still use the structure of PressKit as it was created. So that's, again, like not what I expect it to be known for, but probably the most impactful thing I've created is PressKit.
Yeah.
Not a video game, which is kind of crazy.
This is, but again, like what you mentioned resonates so much, because as a software engineer, as a programmer, this is like sort of what we do. We see problems, and then we like see the same problem again and again, and then try to automate. And this is a very, very beautiful example.
Yeah.
So I would love to jump directly into what you mentioned, that you did not turn out as expected. Let's put it that way. So
right.
What happened?
I mean, like, so I was born to an Egyptian dad and a Dutch mother in the Netherlands, and we were not quite a wealthy family, right? Like my dad was illegal, so a lot of hard labor, like exploited labor, and my mom, she was originally studying to be an archaeologist, big interest in mythology and history and all that, but she fell in love with an Egyptian immigrant who didn't have really any money. So when they decided they wanted a life together, she just found whatever job she could. She went into printing, which was a job at the time. Like setting printers for books, and from there, sort of like lived her life doing. Honestly, by the end of her career, she's now retired. A good job, not like a well-paying job, but just like a good job that overall like brought her a lot of joy for most of her life. My dad eventually, obviously, when they got married, became legal. I think he became legal before that even, and then eventually became a teacher. So I grew up to my mom being mythology, history buff, with a very practical, just like, let's get things going, let's get things done mindset. And my dad, who is Egyptian, very charismatic, very loud, who was a teacher. And so that was sort of the environment I grew up in, right? Is that environment. We didn't have much, but we always made things work. And it was always a bit of an odd one, because I was always the odd one, right? Like there weren't that many Arabs in the city I grew up in. So in my school, there was me and like 3 other Arabs. That was it. And so, always a bit of the odd one out. And then I was very big nerd. My school, started a chess program because I was bored in class and they just needed a way to keep me busy. My teacher at the time, Robert van Schaik was his name. We called him Meester Robert because that's the way you refer to like a kindergarten teacher in the Netherlands. He had really quickly identified that I wasn't annoying. I was just bored. And so he just made stuff to keep me busy. So he started a chess program. And then he also started a computer club. And you can pretty much trace back a lot of what I do to those 4 points of data. Like my mom is a culture, history, language nerd. My dad is a teacher, loud and charismatic. I was smart but easily bored. And my teacher found that the best way to keep me busy is give me a computer and give me games.
So
Things just rolled from there.
this is amazing. Do you think, like, for instance, without like having this specific teacher, you would have turned out to the person you're now?
Oh yeah, I might have turned out like a pretty bad person, honestly. Like, that teacher worked with my parents, so it was very early. It became clear that I was either they say gifted, right? I don't particularly love the label, but gifted, and that comes with a whole bunch of like psychological tests and other research. This is before they'd really figured out like ADHD and ADD and autism and all those things as like things that you were testing like young kids on. But effectively gifted was the diagnosis. And so they were testing me. And this is one of my favorite stories. My dad kept this suitcase, this little metal suit. I don't know if people in the West do this, but like my dad did. And apparently in the Arab world it's fairly common. It's a suitcase with all the important papers. And so if anything happens to him, you go to the suitcase and then you'll find like a will, you'll find like the papers for the house, you'll find the papers for the car, you'll find like, and in general, that's where all the important stuff goes. And so I was married by now almost a decade ago. I got married, and when I got married, my dad went into his suitcase and he just grabbed out a folder that said like Ramy, and it just had all the important papers from my childhood, like everything there. And so I just went through and I found one that was this guess a psych evaluation that I'd taken when I must have been like 4 or 5 years old. And it said Ramy exhibits like very sharp intuition of people, but not an emotional intuition of people. Like he can read very well what people are thinking and what people will likely do, and he can create sort of like a pattern in his head of what's happening, and he can use that to as sort of like a leadership skill. So he very automatically pulls a room towards him. And the reason they had put that there is because apparently I had started a mutiny in the group of kids that they had to test. The way they did the tests is they would do tests, and then at the end of it, all the kids would get a cookie for good participation. And I had basically unionized the kids to not participate in the tests unless we got a cookie up front.
No.
And I'm like, this explains so much about me.
This is really you, yeah.
But it alarmed that teacher. It alarmed Meester Robert because he said that's a skill that can turn out very helpful, but it can also turn out very manipulative, and it can turn out like if the kid learns that this is behavior to get him what he wants, and what he wants is not aligned with what the people around him want, it can turn out really, really poorly, right? And so when he made the chess program, he didn't just make the chess program. He made the chess program in such a way that he knew that I would pick it up faster than the kids around me. And then he gave me a role teaching. So I taught the other kids how to play chess. And so for me, a lot of like my enjoyment in life and a lot of like what I find rewarding comes from that, just seeing how other people get better at a thing because I can help them sort of like, and by the end of it, some of the kids were better than me. They were just better chess players, but that to me was not a problem. I was very excited about that.
This is something which we might have forgotten in the introduction, that you're actually like spending a lot of your time, that you're consulting in this, that you're trying to help young developers in these studios. Now you also like you have this online education program as well.
Yeah, working on that too. Yeah.
So this makes like we like again to give everyone the connection here.
Yeah. So yeah, I still do that. Like you say, I do free consultancy, I do public speaking, I do paid consultancy, I go around the world to work with governments and developers associations to like teach people how to make games in ways that also make money, keep them going, fulfill their creative like promise. Any way I can help, really, I like to help. And that pretty much comes from there. I think without Mr. Robert, I don't know how I would have turned out, but I don't think I would have turned out as a person I would like right now, because there is a very selfish version of me that could have existed. And it's hard to say that there's no selfish side to me now. Like, I do things because I enjoy them, right? Like, and I do things because I think they're fun. It just happens that teacher taught me that helping people is a nice thing to want for yourself.
This is so nice, and I think sometimes we cannot underestimate what especially also teachers can do, like both positive but also negative to us.
Yeah. No, I got very lucky. I had Mr. Robert, and then and it's funny because the only teachers I remember are the teachers that sort of like worked with me to teach me something beyond just like because I don't know how that was for you, but like for me, I would read the school book once at the start of a year for every class, and then I would just get good grades. Like I was done. I would read the topology book, and then they quizzed me 8 months later, and I would still just like do it.
Yeah, no, not for me. No, opposite.
That was for
opposite.
me. So I was hopeless as a student.
I don't know the English term, but like, do you have like this photographic memory? Is this the
I
right?
don't. No, I actually have a terrible memory. It's just if I can create a pattern out of information, I remember it. But only if it's a pattern. If there's no pattern to memorize, I don't. So for me, learning vocabulary is really hard unless I can see how that language relates to others. So learning a Latin or Germanic language, very easy for me. Any Asian language, really hard, because I don't have context in my brain to attach that information to. Like the way words are symbols rather than a collection of letters. My brain just won't. Like I would have to learn a completely new way, a fundamental new way of thinking about it. And I could, but it would be really, really hard. Well, picking up Spanish, like I did recently, was very straightforward. Like, so for me, everything has to go in patterns, but the way school information is taught is very pattern based. Like, especially in elementary school and high school, it's just like, here's the information, here's how it connects to what you know.
What you just mentioned resonates really, like, also to the way I work or my brain works, and that's why I thought like I became a computer scientist, because again I was very bad in learning some languages. I think including English, because like so there are weird like every rule has 20 versions of like things that all of a sudden don't work. But like for instance, all of a sudden like I was not good in any of those languages, but for instance in Latin, because Latin for me was like a puzzle, and like with all those like very clear rules, and if I apply the algorithm, I'll end up with a result, and this worked well for me. And I think this is why, again, like also because of my super terrible memory, computer science was the only thing that would make sense.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And it was annoying because it basically meant that for me, school was read the book. And then maybe like the day before a test, just like go through it and be like, oh yeah, I remember that. But I was genuinely curious. I wanted to know what was in the books. I like devoured the books in like days, right? Like all of them, like math, geography, history. Like I just started the year, I wanted to read everything in it.
And back then, did you already sort of like had a career path for yourself in your head?
Not really. Like, so the way a Dutch Egyptian kid sees the world is not one where you get to pick a job. You get 4 job choices: doctor, lawyer, engineer, disgrace to the family, right? And it's a joke I make more frequently, but that's genuinely true. Like, those are your options. And I was a smart kid, which meant that my dad had very high expectations of a rocket scientist or something like that. I loved video games. I started I started coding when I was 6, like self-taught, like not well, but like, code.
What language did you learn?
Basic. I started in basic. Yeah. I was a basic kid. And then obviously sort of like self-taught HTML when that became a thing. And, from there, just sort of like went through every programming language that you can imagine. But for me, the idea that programming was a job, that's not a job, it's a hobby. You can't earn money programming. That seems very unlikely. And like, it didn't help that every game I played, like all the names had nothing to do with mine. Like the 7 Chris's on a development in the credit. And this is the time where credits were like 24 people, 10 people. It was Chris, John, Joe, John, Chris, and John. So for me, the idea that Rami Ismail could go and make a video game, like, no, of course not. No, but it was fun to do. So, I picked up on StarCraft modding, and like that was big. Like the map editor was huge. I spent so much time in that. There were a lot of.
Did you also play video games?
Oh yeah. I programmed more than I played, but I played a lot of games, right? My mom and dad had a rule that I could use the computer for an hour and a half every day. So 1 hour and a half, and then it was done. At some point, I got the old computer, which was an IBM 386. That was our first computer. And it's weird because people go like, oh, you had an early computer. We didn't. We had the hand-me-down from my uncle. We couldn't afford a computer. But my dad needed a computer for work at some point. An uncle of mine had a spare one that he gave to us. But this was Windows 95 time. We had an IBM 386 with MS-DOS. I remember managing to install Windows 3.11 on it at some point. So I had the same thing that I had at school. But it didn't work really well. So we didn't get a Windows 95 computer until probably 98. Right, when Windows 98 was out.
Can you still remember the very first game you played?
Oh yeah, it was awful. Yeah, it was a really bad game.
Didn't see that coming.
It was funny because it was called Jump Joe, and it was a little action platformer where you were Joe, and it was a little stick figure, and you would walk left and right, and then jump onto platforms, and then if you would touch something you would die, but it had like a timer, and the timer was super brutal, so if you missed one jump you might as well quit the game. It was one of those. It was not very good. I actually tried replaying it much later, and it's still not very good, but it was interesting enough, right? That was the first game I ever played. The first game I played on our own computer was called Gorillas. Mm-hmm. And Gorillas was not a game. It was a code tutorial for QBasic. And that's actually how I ended up programming. Is the only game on the computer was gorillas.bas, where BAS was a basic script file. So to run the game, I had to open QBasic, open the code, look at all the letters on my screen, not understand a word because I didn't speak English, I didn't read English, and then hit execute. And then I could throw bananas at another gorilla. That was it. It was a very simple game. You know the old game, like Scorched? Like you had like 2 little tanks or 2 little characters, and then you had to angle. You had to type like an angle and a velocity, and then it would throw a projectile. And the goal was just to hit the other one.
Cool.
That was Gorillas.
Cool.
That was my first game, and that was also the first line of code I edited.
So you started editing the code and see. Cool. And then the modding with StarCraft?
Yeah, that was probably about 10 years later. Like I must have been 14, 15, sort of. Around that time, a lot of games, they didn't encrypt their data files. right? Like the data files were just there. Like you could just edit them. Like I remember back in the day, you could like edit the Windows 95 boot up screen by just loading the file in MS Paint.
I did
Right?
this too.
Yeah, I did it to a friend where I took the image from the Ring and just put that on their computer and didn't tell them. And they did not like that joke. I had to apologize a lot to their parents. It was kind of mean when you think about it, but I just thought it was cool. Like I'm like, oh, you can edit this for whatever. Like this is fun. But it was with everything. So there was this game called Urban Assault. Was Terratools, German game developer, I think 1996, 1998 probably. Little strategy game where you could like build these vehicles and then you could control the vehicles if you double click on them. It was great. It goes from like a strategy game to an action game. But all the units were just data files, just plain data. So you could just go in and change the speed of a vehicle and just set it to 100. And now your tank was a missile, you know? That's the era of games I grew up in. Like every game was moddable because nobody cared, right? And this sort of formalism of like games have a proper way of playing it that came much later. Like that was just not a thing back then. You had a game, you played around with it, whatever way you wanted, right?
I can remember that this was also like a part that shaped me, and like I can like when I wanted to get into the games industry, it was always like you would always see this main tip: you need to be in the modding community. Your mods needs to be seen, and then many people actually made it from the modding community, from the forums into the game dev scene.
Mhm.
Is this something which still exists somehow? I feel this is like pretty much gone. Or what are your thoughts here?
It's much rarer, but it's still true that a good modder has chances at getting a job in the industry. It's just modding tools have changed, and the tolerance for modding has changed a lot. Like now, a game with mods is relatively rare. While back in the days, like any game you played had 1,000 mods, 1,000 like hacks, server hacks, like whatever it was, because this idea of a game as a single expression just didn't exist, right? That's relatively new. I think you can kind of trace it back to like the death of cheat codes, right?
Yeah.
Like that was sort of like the time games flipped from like these are things that you play with to these are things that you play.
Yeah.
Right. And I very much regret that shift, I will say. Like I liked games better when they were meant to be things that you play, but that you can also play with. And it also is part of the reason why I ended up a big fan of studios like Bungie or other studios that always included like modes or multiplayer modes where you can just set all the parameters yourself.
Yeah.
Like things like Forge or just like me and my friends never had more fun in Halo than just giving everybody super high speed and then one of us just like a really big gravity hammer. And that was just it. That was the entire game mode. It's like one of us has just so much health and they have a gravity hammer and that's it. And then everybody else has rocket launchers and just see what happens, right? And
This reminds me a little bit about the games you made then, right?
right. Yeah, a little bit. It's funny. The games I make are the games I've made so far are. So at some point in my life, right, I picked up on this idea that I could make games as a job, and I can actually remember it quite well because it just turns out there were schools. That was it. There was a school that taught game development, right? And in fact, at that time in the Netherlands, there were two. There was the Utrecht School of Art and Technology, and then there was the NATV. I don't know how you would translate it, but it was a school for tourism and traffic. But for some reason, they had a games program. They're now called BUAS. They changed their name, but at Breda University of Arts and Sciences, I think. Those two schools had games programs, and the way they were split is the Utrecht one was artsy, not like graphics art, but like it's an artistic school. And then the other one was a tech school. They just taught like how to execute art very well, how to execute code very well. So obviously, when I saw that those schools existed, I went to them, and to my dad's credit, he came with me instead of just telling me like get a real job. And I applied to both, and then I forgot to put a single piece of paper into the mail, and then I couldn't study for a year. So I took a job at MediaMarkt, which is the European version of Best Buy, and I sold computers there. It was a lovely job. Another person that influenced me, I think, to no degree, was my my manager at MediaMarkt. His name was Jerry van Koten. I had a very weird interview. Like I came in, I had written down all the stuff I did. I did computer repairs. Like I had a little side gig, just like repairing computers for people and getting paid for it. You know, like I wasn't supposed to be an entrepreneur at that age, but you know, I wanted money. I was doing web design for, you know, like the whole gamut of like, I'm good with computers and I need money. So like, I will go install your printer, you know? I gave them my resume. I walked into the room and it was Jerry van Koten, my manager, and then the owner of the company, the CEO of that franchise, that specific MediaMarkt. And I sat down and they looked at me and they just went like, so, and they looked at my resume and they looked at me and they went, you seem like you'd be good at this. And I just looked at them like, yeah, I think so. And I just looked at each other like, yeah, okay, you got the job. And that was my interview. That's the only job interview I've done in my life.
This is of course like all of them are like this. This is like
that's what I've been told.
That's
yeah, it's
exactly
just they
like
ask if you're good at the job, and then you say yes, and then they're like, okay.
Fully
no, it turns out that they trusted me. When I said, yeah, I got this, they were like, yeah, okay, that sounds about fair. And they hadn't had that with any of the other applicants who all were like nervous or like, I just sat down, they asked me a question, I looked at them, I looked them in the eye and said like, yeah, I got you. And I was like, okay, well, if you can sell yourself to us, then, you know, you can sell a computer to a random person. So Jerry, on my first day, he took me apart, he took me aside, and he sat me down. He said, Ramy, listen, I like my job, right? I've been doing this for 10 years, and I'm probably going to be doing this until I retire. And I love it. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't need anything else. Like, I wake up, I run the stock, I check what we have in the store, I give my speech to the team, we get our numbers, we're proud of them, we celebrate them together, we're not proud of them, we talk about them together. Like, I'm good here. I'm not going anywhere. You, however, you're getting out of here. Like, this is not your life's path, right? Like, there's going to be a point where you're going to have to choose between showing up at work and doing the thing you really care about. And he said, if that day comes, give me a call and go do the thing that you need to do in life, right? And so that day came, and it came at the worst possible date. It was the launch of Super Crate Box, which was Vlambeer's first game. And the day before that, there is this, the day before that launch day, there was a massive sale at MediaMarkt. It was like one of the big yearly ones, like the BTW dagen, the VAT days, where they take the taxes off of the product. Like basically that you get a discount equal to the taxes you would normally pay. So that's a massive day. It's like a Black Friday before Black Friday was a thing in Europe. And my co-founder, Jan Willem, came to me that morning, and he just had this idea for a feature where we would count the crates of the player in the menu. And I was like, well, we can also count the crates worldwide. Like, I can just write a server thing, and like we'll just have the total amounts of crates collected. And then he bounced back of that, and he just went like, yeah, and then maybe we can do like some cool stuff if people, or maybe we can put it on the website. And we were just like, we just knew we needed to do this, right? This was going to be a thing. But it was that day. And the launch was the next day. And the only way I was going to get this done is if I skipped work. So I remember that conversation, and I called Jerry. And I told Jerry, like, listen, I'm so sorry, but like, remember when I joined that you told me? And he's like, yep, I remember. Don't worry about it. You don't have to explain anything. I got this. And so I got to work the next day after Super Crate Box had launched, and it had launched, and the crate counter was like a big thing, and everybody was talking about it, and it was a big reason of why I think the conversation around that game sustained as long as it did. even though the design was phenomenal, Willem nailed it, hit it out of the park with that. But like, I think the counter was a big deal of why people talked about the game. I got to work and Yeti wasn't there that day because he didn't work certain days. And so somebody came to me and they're like, did everything go well? I'm like, yeah. And they said like, yeah, because Yeti, like, he worked your shift. And then after that, he worked his shift. And he didn't go home until like 1 a.m. or something, from what we understood. Like, the security system like had like a thing on there. So Yeti is in the credits of every single game I've ever done. Like, he has more IMDb credits than he's aware of.
Oh no.
But without him, I probably wouldn't have made it. But like, it's that kind of thing, right? Like, everything that has happened in my life, I've either run into a person or learned something that inspired me or like helped me understand who I wanted to become. And I want to be like Yeti. Like that's how, like, if I lead a team, I want to be able to sit down people and do what's best for them rather than what's best for me, right? And if I do that, then hopefully people will give that trust back, right? And I think that's a good relation between working with somebody, right?
But this is so nice because like I think like a lot of people sort of like attribute in their mind, but you're actually like literally attributing in your games, in the credits of the games. And this is special.
Yeah.
This is I think this is a very lovely call to action for many people. I love this idea. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, he is a manager somewhere at MediaMarkt, I think. I don't know if he's still at MediaMarkt. He was just such a funny man. He would start every day with the same speech. Like, no, he would go on the floor and he'd say like, "Okay, y'all, listen. Today, look at the weather outside. Right? It's sunny. It's warm. Nobody is in this store unless they want to buy a computer. So if anybody's on the floor, you go to them, you say hi, you ask them what they need, you sell them that computer. Okay." And then the next day it would rain, and he's like, "Okay, y'all, look outside. It's raining. Nobody's going outside into the rain to go into this store unless they want to buy a computer. So if you see something, it didn't matter what the weather was. Just every day it was the same speech: thunder, lightning, sun, clouds, rain, whatever the weather was. Everybody in the store is there to buy a computer, and it's our job to sell it to them."
Oh, this is nice.
What a lovely band. But yeah, no, I think it's so easy to forget all the shoulders that you're standing on, right? And like, for Yeti, just because it was such it's such an inspiration to me. He's still in the credits for my game. Meester Robert, I went to his retirement party like a few years ago, and it was also lovely because like, I haven't seen the man in like 27 years or something. And I walked in and he looked at me and he just did this thing where he just like tilted his head and he went like, "Ramy?" And it was like, "Yeah." And he just said like he had read about me in the newspaper. He'd seen me on the news. And every time like his wife told me, like every time he goes like, "Hey, that's Ramy." He just remembered me. It's just, I think there's so much power in that sort of like relationship. Teacher student, teacher kid, a manager employee, like those kind of things. They're far more powerful if people use them. And maybe I'm a little naive that way, like maybe you have a bit of that Japanese, like that Luffy vibe. Like, I've been very fortunate, right? Like the things that have happened to me, like you list them like that. And I had a great teacher. I had the only time I've had a manager in my life. I had like a truly inspiring manager, right? Every now and then, I think sometimes maybe I'm just too ideal. Like I just believe in the good.
But this is so important because like especially also like the way you explain it, the way you mention it, like also the small things like this, like what like sounds like a small sentence you might say in the beginning of your job. This was something which actually changed your life in the end and was super important. And I think we often need to understand what our words and what our like even small words would do to other people. So just like also tiny positive impulses can mean the world to someone. And
Sure.
this is such a powerful message. Does he know that he's in all those credits?
Yeah, I told him. He even bought one of the games just so he could see his own name in the credits. He couldn't believe it because I don't think I told him until he was in the 4th or 5th game, and I was like, "Yeah, I put you in the credits of every game I made." And he's like, "No." I'm like, "Oh my god!" So I went and showed him. He had no idea, but he thought it was very, very kind. But that's the thing. I think you touched on something powerful there, which is that our words obviously have the same effect on people that look up to us. And like this is something that for me was a massive learning in this industry, is that at some point I started getting a spotlight, and then you have to be responsible with the spotlight, right? There's a thing where you learn through trial and error, and I think I was fortunate to grow up in a time where trial and error was a little easier, right? The little less visible, a little bit less globally important. But like, for example, like I always thought, like if you have a spotlight, you can just shine it onto somebody else. That's not how that works. You can't do that. You can share it. You can like sort of point it, but you always have to be in the light for that light to be useful, because otherwise people don't look at it, right? Yeah. And so through shame and trial and regrets, I've sort of learned like what the spotlight means and how that works, and what it empowers you to do, and also more importantly what it doesn't empower you to do. At the same time, I've learned that, like you said, a single sentence can make or break like somebody's faith, somebody's spirit, somebody's excitement, somebody's hopes, somebody's ambitions. So I think this was sort of automatic. I don't think I had to like make this deal with myself, but I made it regardless. I said, if somebody talks to me, if I can't give them my full attention, I'll make sure that they understand that there will be a time where they get it. Mm-hmm. And I'll not just make sure that it's there, I'll actually do it. So I'll give them a way to get in touch with me. I'll give them an email address or a phone number or a booking link nowadays, because now we can automate that. But I don't want anybody to feel like I'm in a hurry to get out of the conversation. And so that actually took a lot of effort for me, because I am a shy kid. I'm an introverted man. Like I don't have infinite energy, and like just sitting down and looking somebody in the eyes is really scary.
I didn't see that coming as part of the conversation today, but I would love, since you're mentioning this, because I don't think like a lot of people would notice that you're introverted, because obviously most people know you from the stage and see you up there speaking like very confident, like in a super confident way, super loud, and so would you like to share a little bit how also made me things that help, because I think like a lot of people in our industry might be introverted, but still need to sell, talk, and
I think for me the hardest thing is one-to-one conversations, right? Like if I don't know somebody, like again, like I pay a lot of attention to everything about people, and that means that like you look for the way people look, where they're looking, their little tics, the way they position themselves, like just all that information is coming in. But I feel like eyes have the most information of anything on a human, right? And so this necessity of sort of like keeping eye contact with people is really harsh on me, which I don't have on a stage, right? If I'm on a stage, it's one to many, and like it's more like a show. I'm doing a little show, and that takes energy, but like the show is so much easier than a one-on-one for me, because I just do my thing, and I have this collective audience where I can just pick people that are comfortable to me to sort of like engage with. So that's fairly straightforward. And then if I'm talking about things that I'm very passionate about, it also is easier, right? And so this is one of the things I realized very early is I can't sell a game I don't love. Like I just can't, because it's too much energy. Like the energy of interacting with people on top of the energy of trying to sell something, I can't. Like that's too much. And over time I got better, and you sort of learn like mitigation strategies for yourself. But like
what did help you specifically? Do you have any ideas?
I mean, a few of the things that happened is just become comfortable with not holding eye contact. That was a huge one. Like I will make sure that when people speak, I will acknowledge what they're saying by looking at them, but And I'm sure you might have noticed in conversation we have, I like I will look at the person, but then I will look sort of away and just sort of like nod along to what they're saying. So I will make clear that I'm listening, that I'm paying attention. I won't start looking at things in the distance. I'll usually look at the ground and just sort of like listen and nod along and sort of like actively engage with the conversation. That's much easier on me because I'm filtering out like 70% of the information from the person's body language and all of that, and I can just listen to what they're saying. So that really helps for me because that was the expensive part for me.
I just need to add a small thing from my side because, like, again, like for me, it was also always difficult to have the eye contact.
Right.
So that's why, like, I got super excited when you mentioned that. And like the weirdest thing helped me, which I don't really want to explain in full detail, but I read something about that the size of the pupil tells something about a specific person.
Right.
Weird random fact. And then
Right.
I started to, when I would meet someone, even like strangers, I would immediately start, oh, how does their pupils look like?
Yeah.
This weirdly helped me.
Right. The other one that helps for me, and this is a bit of a cheat code, honestly. The way focus works in people's eyes is kind of weird, but it goes for yours eyes as well. If I need to have, for some reason, I need to keep eye contact with somebody, but I don't have the mental energy, I imagine a point about a meter behind their head, like 3 feet behind their head, and that's what I look at. So it looks like I'm looking at their eyes, but I'm just staring straight through. It feels very impolite, but it gives them the sort of like calmth that they need to feel confident and to feel heard. And so, it's sort of like a trade-off there. Like it's not actually what you're doing, but it is what you're giving them as a feeling. And I've long learned that that's more important than what is actually happening. So.
You're doing this also like really well in this podcast situation, like because like of course like the camera might be somewhere, but like
right.
it feels really you're looking at I like
right.
all of us, because like hopefully it's more than me watching this,
Yeah.
but this is something which gives, I think, like me a very comfortable feeling when talking to you, which is sometimes difficult to convey in online discussions.
Right.
So
the other thing that I've learned about sort of like speaking to people that really helped is I got comfortable being a storyteller. So you will notice that in the way I'm talking right now as well. Like a lot of what I do is I like bring it back to stories, right? And my stories have main characters and they have heroes and they have like a moral to them. And like, so I've got very comfortable telling stories, and that really helps because I know the stories, right? I know this story. I know the story I want to tell, and I know what I want to say with them, but it also gives my brain time to rest. Between things that are important, right? Like the things I want to talk about. So that also really helped, is like becoming a storyteller. And I think a lot of people that are introverts are really good storytellers, but they don't necessarily deploy that in their communication, right? They sort of keep it as like a thing that they also have. They tell stories, but they write fan fiction, or they write like fiction or whatever they write, right? It seems to be more common among introverts just also be storytellers. I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I'm generalizing, but it's sort of like a feeling thing that I have. I found it one of the best ways of doing speaking. It's just, listen to people, let them tell their stories, and then trade in a story of your own if that's appropriate.
This is something which you do at conferences, which I find really nice, that you actually like talk to the people up front, what they might be interested, what are their main issues, so what could be like the vibe for the talk you're giving. I find it's really smart.
Yeah, I'm not very good at, I'm actually really bad at public speaking. What I do is more of like, more akin to a stand-up. Like structurally, my talks are more structured like a stand-up show. Than a talk, right? Because I'm really bad at talks. Like if I have to like sort of like memorize a thing and then give it to an audience independent of how they're reacting, I don't know how to do that. Like I've done a few talks that were like, here's the text, and it feels uncomfortable. It like I get this weird like anxiety with like doing it right, and like I start stumbling over my words, and it's just not. I'm not good with teleprompters per se. I'm not good but you give me a context and an audience and like an idea of what the audience could need, and I sort of like play it off like a stand-up routine where, you know, every now and then you do some crowd work. You pick somebody out and you sort of like make them the main topic, and then you bring it back to like the story. That's really how my talks are structured. It's also skill I've read a lot about, and I've actually practiced a bit on. It's like, how do you keep an audience engaged and entertained and like in the right space for the things you're gonna tell them. That's fun little behind the scenes on my public speaking. It's not technically talks that I do.
That's interesting. Like, also, since you mentioned you read a lot about this, so I would have follow-up questions later, I think. But I would love to go back to your game dev journey. So you're at MediaMarkt now, but like, how did you finally end up in the game dev scene?
That letter failed, right? Like that letter stopped me from studying, and then the next year I just did it again. And I actually got the first year I got into both schools, but I couldn't. The second year I got into both schools and had to make a choice. And the choice was really, up until that point, I had done code and art. I was not a great artist, but I could do digital art. I couldn't draw for the life, still can't draw for the life of me, actually. What the Utrecht School of Art and Technology taught was design. And I didn't have any design knowledge. So I thought, I'm already good at programming. I know I can teach myself programming. I can already do art if I need to. I don't know how to do design. Let's go to the design school.
Cool.
So I went to the design school, and very long story short, I met Jan-Willem Nijman, who ended up my co-founder for Vlambeer. And we both hated the second year. And it was kind of like school couldn't help it. It was sort of like a curriculum reset. And then on top of that, me and JW had been making games for almost more than a decade, each of us individually. Some of them with some success, right? JW was doing a lot of game jams. He was part of a community called the Poppenkast. And the Poppenkast was jamming every day. Like they would come home and they'd like just go like make a game about a dog chasing a car. 3 hours later, 12 of them had posted games, right? And JW was one of them. I had gone into more commercial work where I worked with a company called Starwraith 3D Games. I worked as a volunteer, as a member. I just did little bits and bobs that Sean needed as I volunteered. And so I did all sorts of like little random things for that. Like I think I did the company logo at some point, like, you know, like just whatever I could get my hands on. And so my way of looking at games was very much like 2-year structure, and JW's way of looking at games was 1-day prototype. Both of us were not vibing with what the school was teaching us. And then at some point I set up a project where I just grabbed all the best students in the school and just said, like, we're going to make a game and we're going to make it for Xbox. This was Xbox Live Arcade games.
Unionizing again.
Yeah, here we go again. But again, that skill that I had to like sort of like bring people along in like a thing that I think would benefit them and me, right? Like this win-win sort of like structure that I like creating. And so I just said, let's make a commercial game. Like, what is the best thing that we can get out of school is we leave school with a game on our portfolio, not a school game, but like a ship title. So I started figuring out how to contact Microsoft. We started working on the game. The team got way too big. Honestly, in hindsight, we never would have shipped that thing. But it was going well. Microsoft was interested in the game. They even made a first offer. School got wind of that and just killed the project.
What?
Yeah. Because school was like, yeah, you can't do that. And the reason they did that is because they needed those students, the students that I had captured, they needed them for the school projects. And the school projects were for external partners. And so giving all the leftover students to those projects was not going to go well for them. So they just killed the project. And they could, because in the student contract, everything created at school was theirs. And like, I thought that was nonsense. Honestly, the leftover students were all incredibly good. Like, there were super good people. Like, some of the best designers didn't join the project. Some of the best artists didn't join the project because they just didn't want it. It was not an interest to them to do that. But I had incredible designers, incredible artists, incredible music people from the music department. I had programmers. Like, we were having a great time, and then school just killed it, and that was it for me. Like, I was like, yeah, I'm done. Like, that's it. Like, if they don't want people to do things that will benefit their future, then what am I doing at a school? Right. So I decided to drop out, and there was one other guy on that team that also decided to drop out, and it was genuinely the person I liked least of everybody in that school, which was Jan-Willem Nijman, my co-founder, because he was such an annoying art hipster, and I mean that in the kindest way now. But like, back in the day, I was so tired of Jan-Willem just having like big artistic statements with his little arcade thing. He made like parody games of like games that were winning awards. He was just being loud and annoying about everything. And from my point of view, from his point of view, I probably looked like a boring suit that just wanted to earn money with games. But there was one thing we had in common, is we needed the other person to actually do something useful. Jan-Willem could make one-day prototypes, of which 1 in 100 were kind of good, and I could ship titles. So we took that Xbox Live Arcade contact, and we said, okay, you know what? You have this little prototype about running around collecting crates. I can program it and put it on an Xbox. And that's how Super Crate Box started. So from there, I dropped out of school. Then I kind of undropped out of school. I made a deal with school that we could do Vlambeer as our graduation project and as our internship. So eventually I did graduate. And then by the time I graduated, I was 2 years into being in a game studio. I was IGF nominated with Super Crate Box. Radical Fishing Super Crate Box had come out. We were Devolver Digital's first independent title. And so from that point on, I had one really big advantage, I think, over a lot of the rest of the indies back then, which I had an Egyptian dad. My Egyptian dad didn't believe that this was a real job unless I was earning money. So a lot of the kids back then were looking at it as like, no, we're doing this for the art. I was like, that's great, and I love that, but how do I make money with that? Because I can't go to my dad with like, hey, Dad, I play the Nintendo for a living, and also I don't make a living. So I was pretty serious about what now is called BizDev. Back then, after I did it for a year or two, and I had made, the first indie sort of like boutique deals with Devolver, and like I helped Hotline Miami get their deal with Devolver as well. Like, the idea of having a BizDev back then was just in those circles, was just called having a Ramy. That was just what they called it. People just wanted a Ramy on their team, and that was kind of it. Which is ridiculous and crazy, but like it sort of emphasized how unique it was for somebody to really focus in on the business aspect of game development, without getting in the way of the creative. Right. And that's like, I still just wanted to make good games. That was still my goal. I trusted JW with design at some point. I wanted to make sure that if we were doing a game, it would pay for our lives, so that I could not go home to my dad and be like, so I'm broke now. And that was a weird advantage. So from there it rolled, right? Like, so because I was early with business, I was early with press and media, which means I made PressKit. I was involved in a lot of conversation on how to get indies set up on PlayStation, on Xbox, on the Wii, or Wii U, I think, by the time I started talking to Nintendo. I was advising on tons of like initiatives on how to make a connection between the industry at large and independent developers. A lot of the larger industry folks just saw me as a CEO. I was just the CEO of a 2-person studio, sure, but like, So I kind of ended up being like a link in many ways between the world of business and the world of indie. And then over time, obviously, the indie scene professionalized so rapidly that the idea of a Ramy was no longer a thing, right? There were hundreds of people doing what I was doing. And there were people before me who were doing it. I was just very loud about it. Well, I think a lot of the people before me were kind of embarrassed to admit that they were aiming to make money with indie games. I was just like, no, I like food. Big fan of it.
This also like explains a little bit like what we like in the beginning, I introduced you as a little bit of a spokesperson, but this makes sense because like this works so well because you seem to know everyone. You seem to be like linked to everyone and like have so much understanding of all the different positions. And what you're just explaining, also like this biz dev business, basically, this explains a lot in that regard.
And the other half is I got to work with incredible people, like through my own projects, but also through the projects that I consult on and the project that I help out in, the teams that I've helped. At some point you learn as a programmer how to talk to an artist, which was not natural to me at all, because like the artist will come in and go like, yeah, I want a little bit more whoosh here, and I'm like, I don't know how to program whoosh. Like, you're gonna have to define whoosh for me. But like at some point you start to learn like every type of conversation, every type of, and that's just the benefit of working in indie teams that I think would be really hard to do in AAA context. Is you kind of have to wear all the hats, right? In a 4-6 person team. So you learn about art, even if you don't become good at art, because you have to learn about art because you are the pipeline, right? As a programmer, you're implementing it. So if you don't understand that, you can't scale pixels. You can only do 200 or 50%. You can't like go 75. That doesn't work. You can't rotate them. As a programmer, you're like, yes, I can. And then your pixel artist goes like, no, you can't. And then you look at it and you're like, okay, you're right, you can't. Those kind of things, just over 15 years of time, like they sort of add up to understanding most things. But then I think the position I had in games sort of made me a very easy like interview question. If journalists need a quote, they came to me for a very long time because I was eloquent and I could describe my position, and I didn't care. Like it was good. I liked it. Like I liked answering questions, and I liked breaking complicated things down in a way that audiences understand. So for me, it just came very naturally. And then travel sort of started, and that sort of like changed my life again into the person who ended up getting that ambassador award, right? Which I think was the formalization of me as a spokesperson for a lot of game developers. So
and you also like you're really known to focus on a lot of trying to make the industry more diverse, accessible. You had this GDC panel. One reason to be?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, that's fairly straightforward. I'm a Dutch Egyptian kid.
Yeah.
All my Dutch friends I could see becoming game developers, not my Egyptian friends. That felt messed up to me. If my parents had decided to live in Egypt instead of the Netherlands, we wouldn't be talking.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had a chance, right? Like there wouldn't be a 6-year-old Ramy that learns how to do QBasic. English would be much further away from Dutch. I would not have access to visas. I would not have access to the initiatives that the Netherlands had to support technology in the game. Like I would have grown up to go through a civil war instead, right?
Yeah.
Without access to computers, without access to hardware or internet. And I'm just like, I don't like that.
Yeah.
It feels wrong to me that where I was born, as who I was born, the gender I was born, the lack of disabilities that I was born with, like all of these things make it easier for me to make games. And I just want to, like, to the best of my ability, just make that the same value. Like, you want to make it, and honestly, this is we're talking about selfishness. Part of this is a very selfish mission, right? I remember in 2013, I think it was 2013, probably 2013, but forgive me if I'm 1 or 2 years off. There used to be this panel at GDC called the Experimental Gameplay Workshop. And it was this panel where they would invite like a number of designers who had done something weird, right? Something new. And if we forget about all the politics and sort of like the everything around that panel, there was one speaker who made a game that I just thought was phenomenal. The developer was named Ramy, and he made a game called Farsh. And Farsh is a game about rolling carpets. And the way it works is you have a tile, you have a grid, and in the grid, certain places have tiles, and then you have a carpet. And you can rotate the carpet 90 degrees, as often as you want, and then you can roll the carpet. But when you roll the carpet, it rolls out. So it leaves carpet on some of the tiles. And then if you rotate the carpet while rolled out, every tile under your carpet rotates along with you. And so it was this little puzzle game of like maneuvering the tiles by using the carpet. And honestly, this was at the time where we were having very serious discussions about, are there still new mechanics? And this is a discussion that we have every 10 years. So it's not really an important discussion, but like we have it regardless every 10 years. And then here's Mehdi, this kid from Isfahan in Iran, no connection to any formal design schools, no connection to game design, just comes up with this mechanic. And no matter what I did, I could not find any other game in the history of video games that had used that mechanic. And so I went to Mehdi and I said, Mehdi, you have to tell me, how did you come up with this? And he's like, well, I used to roll up carpets. And I'm like, that's it. But that's the mission, right? Like, how many games are we missing? Because the person for who this is just the most natural thing is not making video games, because it's not because they don't see their name in the credits of video games, and they grow up with a parent that goes like, be a teacher, a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, and then they look at it and they're like, well, I guess video games is not for me. It's not my. I don't want any kid to have that. Like, I want every kid in the world to believe like I can do this, right? Because I want to play their games. I just want to play their games. I want to see what I'm missing, right?
You had this really lovely project, like meditation games, where you collected, like, or made a collection basically of 1 or 2, like, games which are supposed to be played within a minute or two.
Right. Yeah, that was a wonderful project. It was inspired by a developer by the name of Tak, who made a little game. And it was this really simple game. There were just lines on the screen, and if you press the button, the first line would fill up. And then if you press the button again, either the second line would fill up or it would reset. And then if you press the button again, the third line would fill up or it would reset. And so it was basically this little roguelike experience where all you did is press a button and then the next line would fill up. And I'm not going to spoil it, but like basically there is a thing you need to understand to be able to play the game, to understand the game. But the game doesn't explain it. It doesn't have anything. It's single control. And I was just one day, I was waking up and I was having kind of a bad day, and I came across this thing in my morning, sort of like browsing, and I played it, and then afterwards I was just inspired. I was just this is so clever, it's so cool, it's so minimalist. I wish I had a game like this every day. And that was it. So I went and did the probably one of the dumbest things I've done in my life. I said, okay, let's do that. And so I made an open call. I started reaching out to developers I knew. I did anything, and I gave them those rules. Like, it's a 5-minute game. It can only have one method of control. It cannot rely on tutorials. It cannot rely on spoken text. And it needs to take no more than 5 minutes. I got 366 developers. Each of them picked a date and then made a game for that date. And for some people, the date was relevant. Like, some people made games about visiting their grandparents' grave because that was the date that their grandparent passed away. Some people made games about a storm that was happening on the day that they were making the game for. Some people were making games just unrelated to the date at all. But everybody sort of like picked a thing and then went with it. And then just made something. Like, I made a game for it. Like mine, I had a friend visiting the Netherlands, and we made a game where there was this big thunderstorm. And we just made a game about taking a photo of a thunderstorm. So you just have to wait for the right moment and then hit the shutter, and you can increase the shutter speed. And it was just this silly little thing. It was a little playful, but like it was just interesting. And so we connected 366 games. And then together with 2 friends, we created a launcher. And the launcher only allows you to play the game of that date on that date. So over the year, every day, you would have a small little 5-minute play thing that you could play with. And what a wonderful project.
I love it. Like, we also made a game for it back then, and what I found like super inspiring, because like I'm so frustrated that again, like in the time of live service games where you can only play 1 or 2, maybe 2 of them at once, and everyone is trying to make those games the most attractive games in the world. I feel like this focus, what you were mentioning, that's why I was reminded of the meditation project, that in the end it's so exciting sometimes to strip down a game to like one single concept, one single mechanic, one single idea. Like also in point and click adventures, all of a sudden when you have this relation because you found this smart puzzle and this small tiny moment of joy. And I think like we're missing, I don't know, this is like how I feel sometimes, because games are supposed to be bigger and bigger and bigger. And especially those things I feel are a little bit missing these days.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's also just a result of like, and this is some, you know how I said like we were Devolver Digital's first game? Sometimes I wish Devolver had failed, not because I hate Devolver, but like because the truth about indie publishing is that we only need publishers because there are publishers, right? There would not be a need for indie publishers if there were no indie publishers. It worked fine before them. Now, there's a few things that publishers add to the ecosystem, which is if you want to make a $300,000 game, you're a kid somewhere in a country where you don't have access to $300,000, a publisher could give you that money, right? It's rare, but it's possible, right? So there are games that are made only because publishers will take risks on games that nobody else would take risks on. So for that, I'm very grateful. What they also do, though, is these are money companies competing with each other. So they have money, and they will use that money to get an edge on each other. So they're spending more money on graphics. They're spending more money on marketing. They're spending more money on music. They're spending more money on all these things, which means that an indie game budget balloons from like realistically what should have been $40,000, $60,000, right? 2 or 3 salaries, to now like teams of like 12, 14, 20 indie developers work on a thing for $1 million.
Yeah.
And that takes away, like people always say like, oh, you should be an indie so you can take more risk. Indie is far more risk averse than AAA is. It's crazy. Like this, a lot of indie has to be, right? If you want to make money with this, you basically have 4 genres that you can make games in. If you do anything else, good luck getting funded. Like if you can self-publish, of course, if we go by the true definition of indie as like independent from a publisher, sure, you can do whatever. Like times are better than ever, right? Like tools are cheaper, more accessible. Like you can do by yourself, you can do things that 5 years ago would be impossible. But structurally, I think the reliance indie has on like $300, $400, $500, $1,000 budgets nowadays is really hurting the cool stuff we see, and it's what makes me really excited to have something like itch.io, where people are just like making shit, like just like, cool, I wanted to make this, I made it.
I mean, this is a little bit Pandora's box we're opening right now, but like this is a little bit of a difficult situation, because like I'm a huge fan, of course, of democratization of game development, that it's more accessible, but it also made so much harm. Because again, like I was recently I was giving a talk, and I wanted to talk about the democratization and open access in game development. And I remembered that a couple of years ago, because again, I find not everything good about this. And one thing is that there are tutorials about that. And I remembered one specific tutorial I saw on the internet like 2, 3, 4 years ago, which was called How to Make a Game in Unity and Publish It on the Store Within 4 Hours.
Oh God!
And this was like I thought it had so many views, and so there's so many, forgive me, crap games which look exactly like that specific game on that specific store, because everyone did this tutorial. And then I was, for this talk, I was trying to find this exact video again. I did not find it, because I found videos which said in 1 hour how to create and publish a game in 1 hour.
That's the thing, right? Like the thing for me is like, I don't mind that people are making this game in 1 hour and then publishing it. What I do mind is that there is an expectation of commercial viability attached to it, right? Like when I was making stuff as a kid, I didn't think there would be money in it. I just enjoyed making stuff, right? But as soon as you add money to that mix, or as soon as you add sort of like this idea of like there being a value in just publishing it on Steam or something, you know, that's when it sort of starts breaking, because you're turning it into a commercial context rather than a creative context. And this is one of the things I tell every team I work with is like, please don't let the market tell you what game to make. Like, figure out what game you want to make, and then see if you can fit it to the market. And if you can, make it. And if you can't, then don't. But if you're a kid, like, don't think about market. Like, just think about, can I do this, right?
Yeah, and one of the main issues, like with this idea that everyone can publish so fast and so easily, is like just like you developed a game for 4 years and put your heart and soul in there, and it's a masterpiece, but nobody might find it because you did not have the marketing budget, and like all those 100 other small 1 hour games, which is just supposed to be tutorial games, are published at the very same second, makes it a little bit difficult for you to be seen.
Yeah. And that's why marketing is now an expense, right? Like you have to actually do marketing to a pretty significant degree, which is partially a problem, is partially the fault of the publisher spending 50, 60, 70, 100, $200,000 on marketing and putting like trampolines over at PAX, which was a great idea, by the way. No shade against the idea, but like one of the reasons Vlambeer ended up working with publishers every now and then was that even as Vlambeer, which was sort of like one of the hottest indie properties at the time, we couldn't compete with Devolver. What are we gonna do? Like, we had a booth, we had fans, they would drop by, but Devolver had like a trampoline, right? So, like at some point you just kind of had to give into this idea. And there's a few fights that we lost that we were never gonna win. But honestly, the boutique publishers sort of like ballooning the budgets is one of them, and then free to play was the other one because it didn't exist when I started. It existed in Asia to some degree, but it was not common in the Western world. I think we lost something there as well. This idea that games should be free, which.
So I mean, you're already like sort of like going into the direction, but like basically, it is. I feel it's becoming more and more difficult. But is there any like specific advices you would give indie devs, especially these days? But obviously, to have a trampoline, this seems to be a good one.
I mean, advice for marketing or advice for just in general being an independent developer?
Both, probably in general.
Right. Well, for marketing, the one thing I will tell you is that you will read a million different opinions on how to do marketing. And the right thing is to go and research it, read all of the possible perspectives. And my tip for marketing is do all of them. Just do all of them. If it says do A/B, like ad buy, do A/B ad buy, have a YouTube account. If TikTok survives, go do TikTok, Instagram, make tweets or blue skies or whatever. Like just do all of it and then see what feels natural. Like what turns into a ritual for you? What is something that you can get excited about or at least not feel completely drained by? And then just pick a day in the week and just make a bunch of stuff, right?
How important do you see TikTok?
I mean, TikTok can be very useful, but that's the thing, right? Like it depends on the game and the creator. So for some creators, for some games, TikTok is an amazing choice. They're usually more visual thinkers. They might have grown up with TikTok. They have games that look interesting that you look at for like 10 15 seconds and you go like, oh my god, there's this game where you attack with like symphonic notes, right? That went super viral on video platforms for a while, but the developer had a very charismatic way of talking and like the game just was immediately like you grokked. I don't know if grok is a real word in the real world, but you grokked what it was immediately. You look there, you're like, oh, I get it, this is so cool, right? That works on TikTok. That will probably not work for like a turn-based strategy game as well, right? So it's also like, but if you have a turn-based strategy game being made by a very charismatic creator, then TikTok works again. And like, so, like it's, there's not a real good answer to the question besides try everything. And then the rule of advertisement is simple. If the amount of effort you're putting in is lower than the amount of result you're getting out of it, do more of it. And as soon as that flips, start seeing what you can change and then eventually phase it out. For indies, my advice has really never changed in the years I've been doing it, which is this job is too hard to do stuff you don't care about. Like, that's it. If you're going to make a game, please don't look at the market and go, oh my God, roguelikes are popular, let's do a roguelike. Or, oh my God, multiplayer party games are popular, let's do it. You're looking at like the top of a giant pile of like dead video game development dreams. Like, you go do something that is so you that nobody else is doing it, right? Like that's it. Like there's nothing complicated about it. Find something you care about and then do a good job at it, right?
This is such a nice quote. Do something that is so you. This is really lovely.
But that's it. Like, I can't promise it'll work. I can't promise you'll make money, but I can promise by the end of it you won't be miserable. just because you spend 2 years of your life doing something you don't care about. Like, this job is way too hard. The market is way too difficult. Getting excitement for your game is way too hard. But if it is a game that you're proud of, that you're excited about, that you love making, I don't care whether you love playing it. I don't even love playing most of my games. I love making them, right? I love seeing other people play them, but like, I am terrible at Nuclear Throne. I can't even emphasize how bad I am at that video game. And I beat Luftbrowsers like twice in my life, I think. I liked Ridiculous Fishing. That one was pretty good. Like, I was pretty good at Ridiculous Fishing. But the point stands, I made those games because I enjoyed making them.
Yep.
Not because the market said this was a good idea. And of course, when we were picking the game, out of the ideas we have that feel like us, when moment came to pick a project, I would pick the project that had a great opportunity in the market. But I'm not starting with an opportunity in the market. I'm starting with, okay, I see something here that should exist. There's a space or an opening or a feeling or a thing that I want to put it out there. Let's look for that. Let's dig at that. And none of my games have ever started with like, oh my God, there's a massive opportunity here. They always start with like, wouldn't that be cool? And it would just make your life easier. Like, just care, you know? Like that's it. That's the pro tip.
So we touched a little bit on the topic already, but like the current state of the industry.
Pretty abysmal, right? Like, I don't know how your perspective on this is, but from where I'm sitting, like, you know, I do my consultancy. I do 4 hours of consultancy a day, and like a majority of it is just free. They're rough times. Like the post-COVID hangover, as we like to call it, is very rough on games, because games was one of the only properties in sort of like the global ecosystem, in the global economic portfolio, that was overperforming during COVID. But investors being investors, stakeholders being stakeholders, shareholders being shareholders, they extrapolated it into the absolutely improbable, when then they lost a lot of money. So games is sort of like a bad word right now, while things like AI and metaverse are like good words. Gamification and like all those things are still good words. It's just video games bad, right? On top of that, we had a weird economy, and like we could talk about like the reasons for this forever, but like the short version is there was no money, and the industry is stabilizing at a point lower than when we went into COVID, which means that we have more game developers than ever, but less money than we had before, less opportunity than we had before, less platform than we had before. It means there's incredible pressure on funding. So right now, if you're going to make indie games, and this is not just true for indie, it's actually also true for AAA, but keeping the focus on indie for a moment, we're kind of back at that period of time that we were talking about before, where it is a privilege to be able to make an indie game, because you're probably not getting any funding. So you need to make a version of the game that you can do without funding, right? That's the version you should be building, is one that you can put out there, even if it takes 4 years. But to make something that you will put out there, please don't do that for your first game in general. Like, make something smaller, but make stuff you care about. And if that just happens to be a 4-year game, then go do the 4-year game. You'll probably take 10. It's just how games industry math works. But if you don't assume you have to self-publish, you're going to be in trouble right now, because almost everybody is super risk averse. And that extends to like how you should pitch, I believe. Like, at this point, like, please don't put your Steam page live. Like, go talk to publishers, see if they're interested. If they're not interested, then put your Steam page live. Because that way, you know, if the Steam page goes viral, they'll reach out to you. But if nobody cares, they can't hold it against you, because there is no Steam page yet, right? So like everything got risk averse, and everything, the whole ball game right now is like, try to de-risk everything about your game. Which means we're getting a really boring wave of games at the moment. Like, very, very careful, very safe. A lot of things that are funded are just like things that worked before, which is a bit of a shame. And then occasionally there's something cool. But AAA has the same problem. Like, you know, they've locked in on live service makes the most money, and then occasionally a very large AAA, quadruple A action adventure game with a pseudo open world. Open world is no longer the thing; it's now a linear open world, sort of the God of War model. And then under all that is maybe the only exciting thing about this period of time is it is really easier than ever to make stuff. And people are making stuff for all the weirdest reasons at this point. And that's really exciting to me. It's like I'm seeing games being made because it's somebody's birthday. And somebody just makes them a video game. And I'm like, you know what? There's hope there. It's just fundamentally not industry, it's medium. Right? Like the industry is in a really bad place. The medium is doing great. Phenomenal, like amazing stuff is happening all the time. There were new revelations in how we interface with players, like new idea, like from like Balatro to Baldur's Gate to like so much amazing stuff is happening. As an industry, though, we're just, you know, our industry incentives have lost alignment with making good games.
Yeah.
Right. That's overall, that's what's screwing up things right now.
For the last part of the podcast, I thought to go a little bit more into the things that actually shaped you, if you're up to that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think you know where this is going. Like, I might have the one book or two, for instance, or I'm always like looking for your recommendations. So, and a little bit like things that shaped you. Like, I think, like I heard very clearly already, it was a lot of persons, a lot of people that actually shaped you. But what is like, are there specific other things, mediums, maybe experiences? Again, like in the best case, like a full-fledged list of books,
Right.
which I have to read then afterwards.
Right. Yeah, books were a very big one. I'm an avid reader. I remain an avid reader, but I always like the books that try to talk about bigger things through smaller stories, or like through stories, right? So kind of similar to how I talk. It's like you tell a story, but really you're trying to say a specific something that is too complicated to understand without the story. Right, because you can write stories about feelings or things that you want to resonate with people because they recognize them. I like the stories that challenge me to resonate with something I didn't understand, right? And so one of my favorite books is called Ventus, which is by I'm not quite sure where he's from, Carl Schroeder. Wrote a book called Ventus. It's available online for free as an ebook. And it's just a very odd book, like just deeply adore it. I read it every now and then. That one I really loved. And then as a kid, I had a short history of nearly everything. I don't know if you had that book. I had the illustrated edition. Just infinite curiosity for the world, which, you know, if there's ever, I have a lot of the children that have been born in my vicinity, friends, like, you know, family, like having a lot of kids everywhere. Like that book I'm buying for every kid.
Oh, this is nice. That's a really nice idea. Yeah.
It's just the best book. Like it shaped so much of how I look at the world, as like things you can learn to understand, right? Like, let's see what else. Music-wise, I was always a bit of a weird one, but like music has been a large part of my life. But like you know how if you have a Linkin Park kid, they can go in two directions. They either go metal or electronic. I went electronic, and then sort of like
team metal.
Yeah. That's the same story for every Linkin Park kid. Either ended up in metal or electronic, and then sort of like swung back through the other one, and then back onto sort of like kind of liking everything. So that's kind of where I ended up. So music is very useful here. I mean, TV-wise, like obviously I have a lot of Egyptian sort of like anime, which is actually Japanese anime just dubbed into Egyptian, but like I'm shaped equally by Dutch culture and Arab culture, and that means a lot of my references would be completely impossible to parse unless you're Dutch or Egyptian. Which is a strange thing about modern culture. Is the world has globalized to a point where we, at least across the West and large parts of the world, we all understand the US culture, but not each other's culture. Like, I wouldn't know if you mentioned like 3 things that you grew up with that are like specific to where you grew up. I would have no idea.
No.
But if you ask me about like the mailboxes in the United States,
Yeah.
I would know, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can show me the color of the taxis, and I'd be like, oh, that's New York, right? And it's such a strange unevenness in the world. And I find that such a shame because, like, you know, you go online and you see all these conversations about like having watched Friends, and I'm like, well, I used to watch something called Ter Land, Ter in the Lucht, and it was this TV program in the Netherlands. I'm not sure if it ever made it out of the Netherlands, where Dutch people would go to this TV show with a vehicle that they built themselves. And Ter Land, Ter in the Lucht means on the land, in the seas, and in the air. And you would build a vehicle that was meant to get you from wherever you started to a bell that was hanging, and then you had to ring the bell, or you would try to get as far as possible. So people would build their own like little airplane thing, and then it was always over water because we have water everywhere. And then you would just like jump off a thing with your built airplane, and then just see if you could float far enough to make it, right? That was for me, that was TV. Like, I love that show. Like, they just brought it back the other day, and I can't wait to go watch if it's still like as ridiculous as it was. But people would put so much effort into their vehicles and not even make it down the slides, but you could tell that they still were happy because they just got to build the thing. You know, that was a huge influence for me. And like Egyptian like drama TV shows, like, you know, like about like the world were like huge. Comedy wise, I'm far more Dutch than anything else. Like, I have a very Dutch humor. Like, it's kind of like a blunt humor.
What is the Dutch humor, right?
Very, very blunt. The Dutch are an incredibly blunt people. They say exactly what they mean, exactly the way they mean it. I think one of my favorite things in the Netherlands is when a US person, especially US people, come to the Netherlands, we have to train them. We have to like teach them to understand that you don't ask somebody on the phone like how they're doing per se. That's not like you're calling a help desk. Like, you don't care how the person is doing. They're sitting in an office answering your phone call. Please stop. What is the question, right? We don't say have a great day to people who are selling computers. Like, and please don't tell me to have a great day. I'm here in a small office. Like, there's not even sunlight in the building. Like, I'm not having a great day. I'm helping you buy a computer. So we end these conversations with werkse, which means like, do a good job, right? And so the Dutch, they're very like, they just say exactly what they mean.
Oh, that's
right?
nice, actually.
It's very nice, but that also means that Dutch humor is like kind of sharp to most people because that's our baseline. Our baseline is just saying the thing, and I think a lot of, especially US humor, is about saying the thing you're not supposed to be saying. But that's not how we do it in Dutch. You just say the thing, right?
I'm just thinking, what is the Austrian humor about? But I think the Austrian is known to be very dark.
Oh, it's very dark. Yeah.
I think so. I don't
that's
know. It's known as dark and like this, like the mountain people who don't see a lot of sun and like being there well is. So it's I think very ironic, like full of irony, full of darkness.
Yeah, you see that in a lot of countries with like more difficult histories. Like South Africa has a very similar, like sort of like ironic, like metaphorical humor and storytelling as well, right? Like, I think it has to do with how our cultures wrap around their own history and their own identity. But the Dutch can also be incredibly dark. I remember there was a TV show that when I was growing up that I also think would be a big influence on me called Alfred J. Kwak. Alfred J. Kwak was a bird. It's a yellow bird.
We had this too, I think. Yes.
Yeah. And it's this yellow duck, and like the kind of weird thing about the show, because it's made by a Dutch, I think it was a Dutch show. Alfred J. Kwak was this bird, and you follow his entire life. But like the first thing that happens is he gets orphaned when his parents are killed, and you're just like, I watched this when I was like 4. What is happening? Like, and like the series went so hard on like such difficult themes, like it was like there was about fascism. It was about being an orphan. It was about like morality, doing the right thing, doing the wrong thing. And apparently, the whole show stems from somebody hitting, like, I think the main creator like hit a duck with their car, and they just went like, "What happened to this duck's family?" And from there, this whole TV show where you follow this tiny yellow duck from like a kid all the way to like the end of their life. Crazy. Like, that was an influence on me, you know?
There was this whole like series of different Japanese animes, which were like probably when we were young in TV, like like one of them was Heidi, one of them was I cannot remember the name, but like all of them have been such like children's and animation series, but like so dark and so
Right.
sad stories. I cannot remember the names now, but yeah.
It was a very particular time, I think, where a lot of our stories were allowed to touch much grander or darker themes than I think.
Everyone died all the time.
Yeah, that was just. I mean, anime wise, I was a Dragon Ball kid, so I kind of avoided that. Everybody just came back to life every time anyway. But later, like to me, that was new that characters would not die. Like all my childhood characters just died all the time because Dutch storytelling, and I'm like, okay. But that said, like I find that such a complicated question. Like, what inspired you? Because the things that inspired me are not U.S. culture. Like they're not global culture. They've not gone into the canon of the world in a way where you can easily talk about it. And to me, that is honestly one of the most fascinating things about this, because it also sort of like goes back to a lot of the work I do in working in the world. Is I think people underestimate how much of a shortcut it is to be making games that take place in the United States. And a lot of us make games that take place in the United States, even when we're not doing it, because when we're thinking of a game, we're thinking of global culture. But when we think of global culture, we think of US culture. It sort of like happens automatically, but like, Nuclear Throne, we have the Frozen City. That's not a Dutch city. I can tell you that. That has nothing to do with a Dutch city, right? Like that's a US city. It's like the little like bent like light bulb and like the flats and like all that. That ain't the Netherlands. Like, you could argue that maybe it's another like superpower, but it's definitely not the Netherlands. To me, the idea that you get these narrative shortcuts by placing your work in places that are globalized is incredibly frustrating. It's like, if I want to tell a story about the apocalypse, but I didn't want to reveal that the apocalypse is happening directly. I wanted to sort of like hint at that there's an apocalypse happening. I could do that in an American context. You would go into a store and gas would be $40. You'd go like, oh, okay, well, something is wrong, right? And like, there would just be a normal conversation. It'd be like, well, gas is 40 today. And the other person would just buy it, right? And you'd be like, huh? What is wrong with it? But you can't do that in the Netherlands. You wouldn't know what the number would be, right? You don't even know what a gas station looks like or what the interaction is between a gas store clerk or like jail, right?
This is so interesting because like it is really like we are all so shaped by the US. Like I think especially the movie industry and like of course like the video game industry, but like very much the movie industry. This was something like when I moved 2011, I moved to the US, right? I moved to Boston, and I have never been to the US before, so I went there with my giant suitcase, and this was my first time being ever exposed to the US.
Right.
And I was sort of like so surprised and shocked because like I was constantly looking around. This looks like in the movies. This looks like I'm in a movie because like obviously like even like this light switch would look differently compared to what we have here in Austria compared to the US ones. And this like was for me just a giant movie show. I was all like
right. But that's the thing. What a US light switch looks like.
Yeah.
A lot of people from around the world would not know what a Dutch light switch looks like.
Yeah.
Right? Or how do we do air conditioning? Right? what is our tradition for Sinterklaas or Christmas, right? Like, what do we eat at our holidays? What is winter food? What is summer food, right? Like, what is a good drink, right? Like, all these things are just like this canon that we have about this country on the other side of the planet, but we don't know it about neighboring countries.
No.
Like, we could say like the French eat croissants, sure, but like that's not what they eat, right? They like croissants, but like if you go to a French family, that's not what they're serving, right? So even that is a US story.
Yeah.
The French eat croissants, and we just took that over, right? It's a little bit British as well because they like taking the piss out of the French, but like even our understanding of the countries around us is lesser than our understanding of a country on the other side of the world. And I find that fascinating because it shapes the way we tell our stories, right? Like it is better to sort of like generalize our stories to a US audience because that gives us a global access. And I'm so jealous of books because like books are usually written in their own language, right? So when somebody writes a book in the Netherlands, they probably write it in Dutch. And so they have access to all this shorthand that they can use that we can't use in games because making a game for the Dutch market is kind of unsustainable, right? So books start in Dutch, and then if they are successful enough, they get translated into other languages. But then by that point, they have enough traction that they might have international success. And that's how you export culture across boundaries. But doing it in games is really hard because you have to first get the trust of the audience, and then you need them to come along and like explaining your culture and your background and like this is different but normal, just accept it, right? I find it such a fascinating. It's one of my obsessions right now. Is like that shortcut that we use in our storytelling to say things that we're not saying through a global understanding of one specific culture.
Very, very nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
Very complicated answer to your question, though.
yeah, no. But like, I think you might. I don't know. Maybe you remember this project I worked on, this A Year of Playing the World, where I tried to find these games from all the countries and then try to play them. And this was like what you just said. This would make actually a lot of sense because like especially like for books, they have a national validity. So it's absolutely nice to have like a book which is only known in your country and can only be read in your country. This is good enough, but it does not work for games and like it's I think, and it's just like one train of thought. Again, like some games still have this obsession about they have to be so many hours long or whatever. So again, I think like this appreciation of also just 1 hour games telling one short story, but also to again give more people somehow the access to play those games.
I mean, that's another thing that I find fascinating, right? Because the idea that games have a certain length that they need to be is also the length that is appropriate is also different per culture. Right? In some cultures, there's more time to play games because life shapes around that, and in some cultures, it's less, or like the price of games is more expensive relative to your time, or like so. Even how long a game should be seems to vary around the world.
Interesting.
Right? How much is right for like $10 equivalent of game just varies, but also the way we tell stories varies, right? Like, for example, in China, storytelling tends to be grander or larger or longer than a lot of what we're used to here. Like, and there's this expectation of having a certain understanding of the Chinese canon in Chinese media that I'm also very jealous of, right? Because you play Chinese, like Black Myth Wukong. I played Black Myth Wukong. I didn't understand a single thing that was happening, right? Like I know the base of the myth that it was based on, but I don't know it well enough to connect with the moments in the game in a meaningful way. And the fact that they just did that, I was like, oh my God, like, can you imagine doing that for the net? Can you imagine doing that?
Yeah.
Right. So even what we expect from our games, I think, is very much shaped by who we are and what we are and where we're from and what our expectations are. How we like to play games is shit. And so everybody just trying to hit that one market is just makes me so sad. But I get it because games are expensive. They are expensive to make. but it does make me hope for a different time where I can make a game about Alfred Jodocus Squawk, you
nice,
know, or just like this deeply dark, grim game about like what happens when a duck gets hit by a car, what happens to their family, that's such a Dutch thought. Like I cannot stress how Dutch of a thought that is.
I was
But
just looking for that, like because I think this comic, this anime we had in Austria too, and I was just googling, and all I found was recipes.
oh no, oh no.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Good. Games that inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few that I think were really big. Obviously, StarCraft, but it was more because of the map editor, but also the social play, right?
Are you
Playing
still
with
playing?
friends. No, I fell off after the second expansion for StarCraft 2. I really like StarCraft. Protoss player, like mostly, like I mostly play Protoss, so I'm the tech tree. I think a really big inspiration for me was Golden Sun for the Game Boy Advance, which was an RPG that I just adored. Very systemic, but like very narrative, very Japanese, I will say. And then more recently, I think I was very inspired by Nier Automata, which I just think is such a brilliant exercise in using the medium of games to tell a story that you can only tell through games. And actually, the creator themselves challenged that notion by making a TV series out of it. And I think the TV series just proved that really that's a video game story. Like you can't get the same impact out of that. Papers, Please remains forever a massive inspiration. Cave Story remains forever a really big inspiration. And then Destiny.
Destiny.
Destiny is one of my is probably the game of my life at this point. Like I've been playing for over 10 years. I've had so many events happen in Destiny, so many friendships started in Destiny, so many friendships that didn't sustain in Destiny. Like there's so much life attached to this one game, and I don't love life service in general, but like Destiny is so good at I think the official term is kinesthetics, but like the feeling of the effects in the game related to the button that you press. And there's never been a game that has a better double jump than Destiny.
No.
Never been. I don't think there will ever be. Like the way I can feel that double jump in my thumb right now and tell you exactly how high my character was gonna go. And how I knew that from like the first week I played. Like it has always been spot on. In a 3D game, first-person game in which you have to jump a lot, like that just absolutely phenomenal work. Like I aspire to make a double jump as good as Destiny someday.
You're in so many credits. Is there any game which you have wished you would have worked on?
No. I have learned that any game I work on is a game I can't enjoy the same way everybody else can. So if I like the game, I'm grateful I didn't work on it because that would have ruined it for me. Obviously, there are two games that I've said. There are two games in my life where I've said, if anybody gives me the keys to that IP, I'll work on them. One of them is Golden Sun, which I just mentioned. It's a JRPG series by Nintendo. There were two games that I played. There was a third one. I didn't enjoy that one. By now, this is Game Boy Advance times, right? So this is a while ago. And then DS, I think. So I would work on a Golden Sun game if I ever had the opportunity. The other one is a really weird one. It's a racing game. I don't like racing games, but I love games that are a sport, but then don't try too hard to be that sport. So NBA Jam, NFL Street, Mario Tennis Aces, and then, like the Mario Karts and those kind of things of our world. There is a game called Split Second, which was a racing game in which you could blow up stuff in front of you. And you would basically skid and drift and draft to blow stuff up. I just think party racers are really fun. and they're such feel-based games that I at one point in my life I really want to make a explosive racing game, but specifically I want to make the never-made sequel to Split Second. So if anybody has the keys on that,
I can so much imagine such a game coming from you. This is such a great. Please go for it.
Yeah, I wish if anybody has the IPs, like please let me know, because I would love to work on those. But I think for my practice as a creator right now, I think I'm trying to, I'm working on a few things, like nothing big, nothing like announced at the moment. But like I think I've been not very subtle in talking about that I'm working on projects. I think for me right now, I sort of have, I call it my Miley Cyrus phase, but like I'm known for one thing and one thing in specific, right?
Mhm.
Which is sort of like, well, good feeling, very tightly designed games. I think for now, what I want to do is just the opposite of that. I want to try things that I'm not good at and see if I can become good at them, or take some of the things that I've learned in my career and apply them to them in a way that makes them mine again. So I'm very much playing with that. I'm very much like all of the projects that I'm excited about right now are not things that I am generally good at. I have the luxury of doing that, obviously, with 10 years of a very successful game studio and then selling my part to my co-founder. So I have a little financial freedom. And I thought, why not go do some weird stuff and then spend the other half of my time just helping people do what they want to achieve. And it's been a very, very rewarding period. So
You have so many like looking back, all the things you just mentioned. I mean, there's only so little time on the day. Are like there's specific, I don't know, like productivity hacks that worked for you, or is procrastination something which you ever experienced? Do you have any, I don't know, routines that help you? Because of course, like getting so many things done, so
right.
many things finished. I think this is something which a lot of us struggle with.
Right.
And you have this history of so many finished things.
I mean, I will say that the thing that I can say is that a large part of my prolificness in everything is just boredom. I'm a human of contrasts. Like it's very hard for me to just keep doing one thing if that thing doesn't change, right? So for me, working on games eventually just makes me tired of making games. So to keep making games effectively, I need to be doing something else, and that could look like making PressKit or running an investment fund or running an international event or doing consultancy or whatever it is that I'm doing at the time, or learning to fly airplanes, right? Like it doesn't really matter, but like something else needs to happen. And this has been true in my life, like in every possible ways. Like without contrast to my life, I fizzle out. So that's why I travel a lot. That's why I love learning new recipes. It's why I enjoy listening to new music. It's why everything I do just has like a thing to contrast with it, right? And there are very few things that I need that anchor, but I do need an anchor. That's the other thing I realized. I need things that sort of like give me a place in space and time. And that's, like a home, like the people close to me, like those need to not have contrast. Those need to sort of like be a stable. In terms of my day, I actually have a fairly rigid day structure, but it's not in time, it's in days. So I have my Mondays and my Tuesdays, which are my start of my week, and they're very specifically for specific things, right? There's a sort of like email, meetings, scheduling, catching up with my teams, never on Monday, always on Tuesday, so that everybody has some time to like get going on the week and that we can actually have a good conversation. I have my accountancy on the 23rd of the month or the next work day after that, right? So my days are fairly regimented, and I always start with email and messages, and then I don't touch them again. Like if you email me in the middle of the day, that's very bad luck. I very likely won't see it until the next morning. And I found that setting those boundaries for myself really helps. But then most of my days are 4 hours of consultancy. So I do 4 hours of just talking to people, and then the rest of my day is project work, where project is depending on how many projects I have like a day for certain projects. That's kind of how I keep myself sane. So very strict regimentation over days, not over hours. That's too precise for me. It doesn't give me the flexibility I need.
This actually that's like a perfect follow up because you're mentioning like the projects you're currently the projects you're working on. Is there like any upcoming project you're excited about you want to share?
I mean, I can't share, but what I can say is that every project I'm doing right now is something weird and something odd.
Okay.
But that still ends up feeling very much like me. And that's very exciting because for me, the side of me that I've always sort of like projected in my games has been very much on like the feel of games, sort of like snappy, sort of like clever, sort of like things that loop back on themselves. And a large part of that was obviously also the person I was working with. Like Jan Willem is one of the most gifted designers, maybe the most gifted game designer I know, right? And even though we still don't like each other, like I have no problem saying that like this is one of the talents, one of the people that has made design into such an intuition that, you know, any game that Jan Willem makes will be interesting to play in some way, shape, or form. For me, doing the things that I wouldn't do in the context of Vlambeer is now the interesting part, which means that a lot of the lessons I learned about like design and feedback and kinesthetics and game loop stay there. But like I also want to make things that are slower, things that are a little bit more strategic, things that are a little more thoughtful, things that are a little bit more complicated, that can layer in different ways, that can tell stories in ways that I couldn't before. That's very fun. Like it's just I'm having a blast. I hope that when these projects start getting announced and when people play them, they see why I was interested in them. I don't know if any of them are going to be particularly good, right? Like I can't say, but like I can say that I am enjoying playing them and I'm enjoying making them, and that's just a lovely combo. We did do some play tests with one of the projects the other day, and it's looking pretty good. So I'm very hopeful. But it's the games industry. We never know.
All fingers crossed. Wow.
Yeah.
Is there? I cannot like phrase it in the best way because like in the end I'm certainly thinking about we have to talk very briefly about you being a pilot as well.
Yeah.
This is I cannot phrase a question about it. Like one would be: is there any unusual things, quirky things?
I think the thing about flying is before I wanted to be a game developer, I wanted to be a pilot.
Oh wow!
My first dream job was a pilot because when I was a kid, we would go to Egypt every year. And I think when I was 4 or 5, I just have this memory of walking into an airplane and looking to the left and just looking into this room with a million lights with these two people sitting there looking all cool in their like, you know, like their pilot outfits and like pressing buttons. And then the magic tube would move and it would feel like a roller coaster, which I didn't know what a roller coaster was yet. It would feel like a roller coaster. And they would sit in the tube for 4 hours and watch some cool movies and make some colored drawings. And then you would land and you would be just in a completely different world, right? You would be in Egypt all of a sudden. And to me, that was magic. You would see the clouds from above, right? Like I wanted to be the people in the front of the airplane, but I had glasses. I got my glasses when I was 6, right around the time I first started programming. And my dad, being Egyptian, knew that the only way to become a pilot was through the military, and the military wouldn't take pilots with glasses because it's just too risky. If the airplane gets hit or something happens or the glasses fly off, you can't have an F-16 fighter jet without a pilot knowing where they're going, right? So I was just convinced that I couldn't be a pilot. And then around the time of COVID, I had a really bad sort of like life situation. I had a breakup that really threw me off. And I was like, I need to do something that I love, I enjoy. Like I need to find something new to sort of like spark joy in my life again. And so I decided to take a flight lesson. And, you know, like I knew I was not going to be a pilot because I had the glasses, and I went on the flight lesson. And then when I landed, the lady next to me said, the instructor, she was the, she looked at me, she's like, you clearly love this. Like you enjoy it, you know it, like you play flight simulator. Like, why don't you become a pilot? And I'm like, well, I have glasses. And she looks at me with her glasses. She's like, yeah. I'm like, is that not a problem? No, that's not a problem. It hasn't been for like decades. I'm like, oh my God. So I signed up, I became a pilot. And I will say the thing I learned from flying more than anything else is it's really good to have a hobby. right? And if you're a game developer, you very quickly mistake games as your hobby, but it's not your hobby; it's your job, right? Like it's the thing you do for a living to some degree. And so I can't play a game the same way my friends play a game. Like I will run around the corner and be like, wait, that low trigger was funky. Let me go. And they're just like, I want to hit the boss. Like, can you please keep like, I'm like, no, wait, you pull me forward. Don't pull me forward. I just want to go. And so I can't play games with friends that aren't game developers as easily anymore. The other thing that I really like about flying, there's three things I like about flying. The first one is that like having a hobby is great. The second thing is flying is enough of a mental load that you have to be working on it, but not enough of a mental load that you can't do anything else. So it's a very good space for sort of like latent lateral like thinking, where you're just sitting and your brain is just sort of like doing the thing, and then all the space in between is just filling with interesting stuff. So very often I'll come from a flight and I'll just have like things I need to note down, like thoughts or ideas or anything. Also, the shift of perspective helps a lot, right? Like the world looks different from above. I think the third thing is just like, one of the best thing about having a hobby that isn't games is that you have drama that isn't games. And so the games industry is a very high stakes industry. People care a lot. People have very high expectations. The audience is very, very engaged, sometimes toxic, right? There's so much happening in games. There's so much resting on games. So much of the world is being built on games. Nobody cares whether you fly an airplane or not, right? So in aviation, when we get to the airport, you ask like, so what's the news? And people just go like, the wind is just a little off. Like it's so cross and the tower isn't switching the runway. Like we don't know what's up, but like that's the third time this month. And I'm just like, oh wow, yeah, that's rough. I guess we'll be a little sporty to take off, huh? And they're like, yeah, we'll be a little sporty, but hey, that's fun too. I'm like, that's fun too. I grab my suitcase and I hop into my airplane, and that's the drama, right? And like, so nice. It's just so nice to be in a context where the stakes are different. And I think we forget that games is a very high stakes environment. Not in the way that like medicine or like, like all those things, like it's not. But like, if I have a final story then, since it sounded like that was your last question, when I was a kid, actually that's not true. To this day, I'm terrified of needles. I have a phobia for needles. I don't know what it is, but like I just black out. Like, and it's not like I black out and pass out. It's I black out and try to fight my way out of having to get I just genuinely wake up in cold sweat. And like, one time I apparently kicked a doctor through a door because I was like 14, but I was already fairly large. It was clear that I had to have an injection. I had like a 39-degree fever or something, like dangerous stuff. And they were like, well, we're going to give him a quick shot. And then apparently I noticed and I just jumped up, kicked the doctor, and the doctor fell back into a door and fell through. Not my proudest moment, but just to emphasize like how deep this fear of getting an injection, anything that pierces skin, just like I can't deal with it. My doctor obviously had realized at some point that having to give me an injection meant getting injured. So he devised strategies to not get injured. And my doctor quickly figured out that he could ask me questions or like give me riddles. And like, as long as he could distract me until the thing was in there, I was fine. It was the anticipation that was way worse than the actual thing itself. Right? And so one year he asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I told him the same thing I told you earlier. I told him, well, I would love to make games, but like, that's not a real job. Like, my dad says I should do something useful, like, like become a doctor and like help people. And my doctor looked at me, and I don't know the exact wording, but it went kind of like this. He looked at me and he said like, well, I'm way too old for these video games, but like, from what I understand, they make a lot of people very happy. And I'm like, they do. And he's like, well, I deal with a lot of sick people and a lot of like people that are going through a really hard time. And I was like 11 or something for this, right? Like, you have to imagine, I was a young kid at this time. I deal with a lot of people that are like sick or dying or like just not feeling great. And I've learned that I can heal a lot of them. Not all of them, but I can heal a lot of them. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, but the thing I've realized is that it doesn't help as much healing an unhappy person.
Oh.
Right? So here's the deal. I'll make sure that they're happy, and then you make sure that they're healthy, and then together we can make sure that everybody is okay. And this is, again, like, this is just my doctor. This is my GP. Klein Hanefeld was his name. And he told me that when I was 11. I've carried that with me for the rest of my life. So we are a high-stakes environment, right? Like, we are doing things that matter, not in the same way he does, but it doesn't mean it's not important, right? So many people's life involve games in some way, shape, or form. And what we do changes the world. It changes the way people look at the world. It changes the way people engage with the world. Things from games have ended up in everything from social media to global culture, popular culture. Like, I think for a long time, our industry avoided that responsibility, but we've come to accept it more and more over the past few, like, maybe over the past decade or so. We've slowly started to become aware that we do influence the world, right? We do influence it. But we also have, like we said before, we have an audience that is very opinionated and very loud. Like, this is not an easy space to be in. It's not a simple space to be in. It's not a low stakes space to be in. And I think acknowledging that was really hard for me until I checked out another space where I am playing with my own life. Like, as a pilot, I am literally, like, if I don't do it right, I might die. I might kill somebody. I might, like, higher stakes than in games, but for some reason far more relaxing, right? So that's the third thing. I gain perspective on this other thing that is my life's passion, which is games. That's been very helpful.
I could not have hoped for a better and very positive ending. This was really, really uplifting, especially this part. You keep them healthy, you make them happy. This is so positive, and again, I think this really reflects again and reminds us again why we are in this space. Because as you mentioned, like, to be honest, sometimes it's very frustrating. Sometimes it is a difficult environment. It can be toxic. It can be hostile. Again, the stakes are pretty high, and again, it is, consuming. But being reminded why we still do it. And there are so many things why we keep doing this, and especially this part, because it can, like every single game, like, again, can make such a nice impact. And thanks for reminding us of that. And thanks for all this great inspiring. I mean, you spent now so much time with us. This is amazing. Thanks so much for that. Thanks for all the work you do. Of course, this is something which I cannot underline often enough. So, where can listeners follow your work? Where do we find what should we look at? What can we find? Where can we find you? Follow you?
We're in the new era of socials, so let me see if I can do this one, because I used to have this down to a science. But you can find me on Blue Sky at bsky.app/profile/RamiIsmail.com. But just search for RamiIsmail.com. That's the easiest way of finding me there. On Instagram, you can find me as tha.rami. That's a lot more personal. Like, I just do photography for fun. So don't expect much game stuff. You can also find me on LinkedIn. If you want to connect on from a more professional context, just search for Rami Ismail. I should hopefully come up. I occasionally do work on Twitch and YouTube where you can just find me by name, but it's not very common at the moment. And then finally, if you want to stay in touch and hear my voice more often, I do have a podcast myself called The Habibis, which I run with Osama Dorius and Fawzi Mesmar. And it's a podcast of 3 Arabs in games drinking good Arab tea approximately once every few weeks, inshallah, which means we don't know what the schedule is either. But it's a lovely podcast. It's a lovely crew, and we have a good time doing it. So those are the best places to find me. But if there's anything else you need or anything you want to talk about, you can also just head to my website, book a call. There's a free option right there, or send me an email. And
education resources, a course coming up.
Yep.
So I'll make sure to have everything in the show notes. So
appreciate it.
Yeah, and really listen to the podcast. This is such an amazing group of people, and
I like the Habibis a lot. Yeah, it is a joy. To have found Arabs in the industry is a joy, and to make a home for Arabs in the industry has also been a privilege. So, a very lovely show. And thank you so much for listening, to everybody listening, but also to you, just for facilitating the conversation. I had a lot of fun, and I don't get drilled on these topics all that often. So it's nice to sort of like look back at my own life and remind myself of all the incredible people that were part of it and all the incredible moments that I got to live, and just to remember how privileged I've been to have all these things and how grateful I am to be able to pay them forward. So thank you for that.
Just let me add something here, because you mentioned this quite often, that you have been privileged. But again, I think, like, also listening to all the stories you mentioned, there is so much work, so much contributions from your side. This is so important what you're doing, and this is again, it's not only luck, or it's not only like being, I don't know, privileged. There's so much work you have done and so many good thoughts about this. So I just wanted to point this
Thank
out.
you.
And
I appreciate that.
again, this path has been super inspiring, and I'm sure we learned a lot from this path. And
So did I. So thank you.
thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.